Hello and welcome back to Chiefsman's Corner Live. I will be on Discord audio tonight as well as YouTube comments tonight. If anyone's around, please DM me in Discord or on YouTube comments if you want to jump on the show live. I'm your host, Coach Winuvas, one of the leadership team here in WFL and the coach of the Arizona Cardinals. This show will dive into our long Week 4 recaps with 2 games being played as we speak and 2 simulations to discuss. We'll also have players of the podcast for Week 4 as well as a long Ask the Chief segment. If anyone's tuned in, welcome aboard. Thanks for listening. You can comment in YouTube chat. I'll be responding as best I can to any comments. If you wish to comment live on the show, just let me know via Discord DM or YouTube comments. Hop on and we'll discuss stuff in the WFL Network Studios voice chat area. If you're watching the recording of this, however, we still thank you for watching. Any and all support is appreciated. Without you guys, the WFL does not exist. First thing, as always, when we talk about stuff on the podcast, WFL's incentive plan. This allows you to get some perks that aren't available for every member, simply by doing some extracurricular activities that involve WFL. Anything from Twitter to articles on the Neon Sports site to commenting or participating in this show, even chatting in Discord can earn you experience points. Anything that makes WFL a more immersive experience and increases its presence in the Madden community earns you some sort of credit. Link to the incentive plan is available using the command /incentive plan in Discord. That is all one word, /incentive plan in Discord. Next thing and last thing to talk about is our form Ask the Chief. Use this form during the week between episodes to submit any questions you have for me, and I will answer them during the show, giving you credit for the question. It's an easy way to build up incentive points and provide extra content for the podcast. Use the command /AskTheChief, it's all one word, /AskTheChief, to pull up the form in Discord. With our housekeeping out of the way, let's recap quickly the Week 4 games that we've had that have taken place, and we're going to highlight some offensive and defensive players of the podcast from Week 4, and I am sorry to those guys who did not get their games in for this broadcast. Be aware, advance is tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. So as we bring it up on the big screen, boom, here it is. And we start off with a CPU game as the Saints were out of town this week. They will be out of town, I believe, till this evening. The Chicago Bears moved to 2-2 on the season by winning against the New Orleans Saints. 19-13 your final here. The Saints fall to 1-3 early in the season. In a barn burner, I guess you could say, the Tennessee Titans moved to 3-1, and Cooley G's got his Titans flying against the Las Vegas Raiders. A touchdown separates the two. This was a wild affair. I did look at the logs for this. In fact, it involves an honorable mention of player of the podcast that I have to shout out here. Even though he didn't win player of the podcast earlier, I have to kind of shout him out on here now. And that is going to be Raiders cornerback George Womack. He had only 1 tackle in this game. But he did have 2 interceptions, and the important part of this was that he had pick sixes. The Raiders defense scored 21 points in this game. One, I believe, was off a fumble recovery by Chandler Jones, and the other 2 were scored by George Womack. George Womack, however, did not win player of the podcast because there were some better candidates out there as far as, or at least one, as we jump back into the action here. So Las Vegas falls to 500 at 2-2, and Tennessee continues at 3-1. In a simulated game that'll be in the Texans' favor due to the Chiefs being unable to respond by the deadline. So the Texans will move to 2-2 on the season, we've got it set up, so they'll move to 2-2 on the season, and the Chiefs will fall to 1-3 on the season. So just a notification there. In our game of the week that is yet to be played, it's actually being played, I believe, in the next 10 minutes or so, is when it will launch. We have Denver going in at 3-0 against the Atlanta Falcons at 2-1. It is our game of the week. The polling closed yesterday because we assumed it was going to start yesterday. Unfortunately, Crazy Fast had some internet issues throughout the city that he lives in, and unfortunately that caused issues where he could not play the game yesterday, so they're playing it today at about, I believe, 6:15 my time Central, 7:15 Eastern time. In another barn burner game, which involves our player of the podcast on defense, the Pittsburgh Steelers move to 500 with a 2-2 record and lead the AFC North in a division matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. Ravens fall to 1-3, but it was close, 35-31 your final here. And it does involve our defensive player of the podcast, and I want to give him a shout out on camera here. It was Steelers edge rusher / offensive outside linebacker, excuse me, offensive lineman. T.J. Watt, he had 4 tackles, he had 1 forced fumble, and he had 4.5 sacks. I don't know how you could do much better than that and be on the winning edge. So the defensive player of the podcast for this week is going to be Steelers outside linebacker / edge rusher T.J. Watt. 4 tackles, 4.5 sacks, and 1 forced fumble. Did everything he could to get his team the victory, and they still barely eked it out. 35-31 is your final. As again, the Steelers move to 500 on the season and lead the AFC North. Moving on, we have the Philadelphia Eagles with a win over the Dallas Cowboys, 30-13 is your final. After a slow start, losing week 1, the Eagles and T. Hoove are back on track with 3 straight wins, or 2 of them against divisional opponents in the Giants and Cowboys here, as 30-13 is your final here in week 4 action. And not necessarily an upset, but as Carolina has had a bit of a rough patch this starting out. Going up against the Giants, I guess the first place schedule is starting to rear its ugly head as the Giants move to 3-1 with a 27-13 win over the Carolina Panthers, who fall to 1-3 on the season. I feel confident that Know-It-All will get it together and get his team back above 500, but it has been a rough patch so far early to start this second season of Madden 24. Detroit Lions and San Francisco 49ers, another game that's had a tough time of scheduling. They're going to try and get it in. I believe they're supposed to start sometime within the next, 10 minutes. So that game is going to be underway, so I don't have any score or idea what that's going to be like. As we move on to the Packers and the Rams, Rams fall to 0-4 on the season, as they just are talent deficient, unfortunately. Green Bay Packers move to 3-1 with a 34-18 win over those Los Angeles Rams. Week 4 action sees the Arizona Cardinals go to New England and win 29-10 as your final over those Patriots. Patriots do fall to 0-4 on the season, and the Arizona Cardinals move to 3-1 on the young season. The Chargers continue their undefeated ways in the AFC West. 31-10 is your final over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who fall to 1-3 on the season. The Jets and Seahawks matchup, and an AFC East versus NFC West matchup. The Seahawks had a rough go of it and fall 24-0 to the Jets. The Jets move to 4-0 on the season, stay undefeated. The Seahawks fall to 1-3. In another game that's going to be a simulation due to some connection issues, I believe it was, the Bengals and Commanders will be a fair sim, so we'll find out after we simulate to Week 5 what those scores will be like. Is it an upset at this point when the WFL Bowl champs lose to the Minnesota Vikings? They're 0-4 right now. Juke is not nervous about this, but it's starting to become a little bit nerve-wracking for me watching him, because 0-4, it's going to be tough to make the playoffs in a stacked AFC division or AFC conference, starting out 4 in the hole. But they do lose 41-21 to the Minnesota Vikings, and the Vikings move to 4-0 undefeated as well on the season. That undefeated stuff will come into play later when we get to Ask the Chief. I don't know if Kobe played this game. I'm not really 100% certain. But if it is, it's a rough go for Kobe as he introduces himself to Coach Ches K.E. and his Jaguars, and 26-14 is the final as Miami falls to 1-3 and Jacksonville moves to 3-1. And in what I would declare as the upset of the week, which does involve, because the offensive stats were pretty sad for this week, it does involve what I'm going to call my offensive player of the podcast. The Cleveland Browns get their first win of the season, and Coach Ross gets in the win column against Meek Boy and the Bills. 24-22 is your final, and it does involve my offensive player of the podcast. My offensive player of the podcast is going to be quarterback Deshaun Watson of the Cleveland Browns. He goes 11 of 17, which is not terribly impressive. 248 yards on 11 completions is, though, 3-0 on touchdown interception ratio. When you throw 3 touchdowns and you don't throw any picks, you're bound to come up on the successful end of the spectrum, and he just barely does. 24-22 is your final there, as again, the Browns move to 1-3 on the season and are only a game out of the AFC North. That's a tough AFC North division, but those were my players of the podcast there. Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson, and Steelers outside linebacker T.J. Watt, who just went nuts in his game and just had to be shouted out on this podcast. With that in mind, as I come back on camera here, I'm going to flip over and I'm going to go to directly to the Ask the Chief segment, because the Ask the Chief segment this week is massive. You guys have apparently answered the call as far as sending in messages. Now, some of these are a little bit older, as I basically got sent in after last week's broadcast. So some of these I'm going to be catching up on. But I'm going to flash them up on screen here now. Oh, let me see. I got a direct message. Okay, cool. So, nothing about the show, so I'm just going to pop it back up here. Boom, there we go. And we're going to start with Baratz, our Buccaneers coach, and he's got 2 questions here off the duff. Which 2 teams in the AFC and NFC are on the rise in the WFL, in your opinion? And what needs to be improved in the next Madden edition? And do you think the NFL will ever grant their net game rights to another game maker? Oh boy, that second question. That second question, I could literally make a show just about that second question. I'm not going to. The short answer of it is, what needs to be improved? Everything. Everything. Franchise mode needs a ton of love still. There's a ton of stuff that should be in franchise mode that isn't in franchise mode. If they care about that mode at all, they need to improve it. They need to improve all facets of gameplay in all areas. I mean, it's a game that is bad. It's just bad. Will the NFL ever release the rights? No, not as long as EA pays the money. So as long as EA is willing to pay the huge amount of dollars that the NFL is requesting for their license, for that exclusivity license, no. And EA is willing to pay it because they're making hand over fist money in mud. So the Ultimate Team is what makes the bucks. So that's kind of the way we are right now. So got that out of the way. Again, that's the real short answer. I could go on a huge rant about that, but I'm not going to. Let's talk about teams in the AFC and NFC, because I believe that's what he meant with his question, was what team in the AFC and what team in the NFC are basically kind of jumping up as a surprise team right now, or on the rise, I guess is the way he put it. I'm going to bring the Neon Sports back up, and I'm going to say that of the teams on the rise in the AFC, and this one may come as a little bit of a surprise, but I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yes, they're only 2-2. Yes, it's still early. For all these teams, it's still early. But I think Chilkey is a top-end player in this league when he has his quarterback, a quarterback that he can play with. And I think he's got that in Artie Hill. I think Artie Hill that he drafted, I think was 5th overall, I believe, because I drafted 4th. I think he drafted 5th. But either way, he picked him up in the top 10 of the draft at bare minimum. Artie Hill is kind of the guy that he's been needing, a guy who's mobile, a guy who is a guy who can basically make plays with his legs. He can make plays with his arm, and that's what he kind of needs in his offense. That's what he kind of craves in his offense. He craves that dual threat capability. He didn't have it with Kenny Pickett last year. He just didn't have any luck with him. And I've seen Chilkey play and win 10, 11 games with a quarterback that he can play with. I know last year when we had the reboot, he had Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson, I'm going to use quotes for that, or created Anthony Richardson, and he killed it. So, I mean, I know he can play with a quarterback that he likes, and he apparently likes Artie Hill so far. So I would say the Steelers are kind of my team on the rise, because he's finally got the guy that he feels like is the man for the job. NFC-wise, team on the rise in the NFC, I'm going to go with the Philadelphia Eagles. Mainly because I think T-Hooves finally got his footing as an Eagles owner. He's kind of got the way he wants to do things. He's getting settled in Philly. When he came into Philly at the end of last season, he was kind of picking up not necessarily it was a mess because the previous Eagles owner didn't play many games. So the T-Hoove coming in kind of had to pick up from the bottom, and he did a little bit, but essentially he ended up with a top end pick. I believe he ended up with a top 10 pick. And so he took a year to basically go through free agency a little bit. He didn't do much in free agency because the Eagles are pretty stacked anyway. Did some drafting, did a good draft from what I understand, and essentially now he's reaping the benefits of having the Philadelphia Eagles for a full season. The Philadelphia Eagles should be at the top of this division if the user has any competency, and I know from seeing him in Cleveland and having Cleveland at the top of the standings before he moved to Philly that he can do just that. So I think T-Hoove is a guy to watch in the NFC moving forward. So that would be my teams, NFC, AFC, that are on the rise. And as I bring back up the Ask the Chief again. So we're going to go to question 3. Let me blot this one out because I've pretty much answered it. How do you see your division playing out? You are currently leading. Folks, it's week 4. It's week 4. I played a CPU Saints team. That was not a challenge. If the Saints owner was there, it would have been a totally different story. I got lucky against the 49ers, and I lost a sim to the Seahawks, which I should because of my overall, I'm worse than them. And I beat a Patriots team that's still trying to, Austin's still trying to find his way as far as offensively speaking. So I haven't beaten anybody that's worth talking about. So it's a paper tiger 3-1. I think ultimately the 49ers or the Seahawks are going to win this division. Nothing against the Rams and TST, but he's got a long road to hoe with the Rams. That Rams roster is depleted of talent, and the talent they do have is getting older, unfortunately. So I think it's 49ers or Seahawks division. I think I'm just here kind of just temporarily holding the banner. So there's no reason. It's week 4, guys. It's week 4. Calm down. Relax. As Aaron Rodgers would say, RELAX, relax. So, Kobe weighs in with his first question. Let's make this a little bigger. Who are the league favorites so far for the WFL Bowl? Well, this will be easy, Kobe. I'm going to go with the guys that are at the top right now, which is currently the Los Angeles Chargers at 4-0 and the Minnesota Vikings at 4-0. They're at the top, therefore they're the favorites. That is very subject to change because, as I just said answering the previous question, it's early. It's very early. So it's not anything that really should be taking a huge amount of stock in. Call me in week 15 or 14 whenever. If I'm at the top of the division in week 14, then call me. If I've got like a 3 or 4 game lead in that division with 4 games left, then call me and say, you're doing great. Okay, then I'll take it. But until that happens, until it's solidified, nothing's set in stone at this point for any team. So it's really early, but easy on favorites. Take the undefeated top seeds in both conferences. Los Angeles Chargers, Minnesota Vikings. I actually predicted the Vikings last year would win the WFL Bowl or compete in the WFL Bowl. Not win. They would get beat by Meat Boy, and those predictions went out the window. So these predictions can go right out the window with them. So now as we go forward, let's get another question out of the way because we had a ton of them this week. So this one's a little bit tougher for me because unfortunately I don't keep up with everybody's free agency, so that's a little bit tougher. But first off season with the draft, what team made the biggest impact with draft, free agents, or trades during the off season? I'm going to take the coward's way out on this one because I'm going to go with a team that I know the best, that I know did some things in free agency, and that I know did some drafting, and I'm going to go with the Arizona Cardinals. Yes, I'm going to tout my own horn for just a second just because it's the easiest thing I can do. I did do some research on this, honestly, and I was not really successful in finding a team that was at the top of the standings that also I knew a ton of what they got in free agency. So I'm going to go with what I did. I picked up Rashad Penny, which isn't much, but it's depth at the halfback position that can start now, and let my 2 young guys, one that I drafted in Gregory Harper and one that I've signed in free agency, Keaton Mitchell, let them develop as horses for the future. Gregory Harper's an elusive back. Keaton Mitchell's a receiving back. I've got my 1-2 punch of the future signed long-term. Both of them are basically under at least 4-year deals. Keaton Mitchell signed a 4-year deal. Gregory Harper, obviously, as a rookie, is a 4-year deal. So those 2 guys are basically sitting and letting Rashad Penny do the heavy lifting. Rashad Penny can still carry the rock for me. I don't feel like I need to spend a lot of money in the halfback position, mainly because it's a position that you can find a dime a dozen. There's a ton of guys in free agency right now that could easily play for me and start for me. So I didn't spend too many things in free agency as far as that goes, but I did draft Gregory Harper. On the tight end side, I have Trey McBride for another 2 years. He's a stud, and I drafted a stud in Dylan Stevens. He was the most athletic tight end on the books at coming out of college. He had the highest athletic quotient, BAQ, of anybody in the draft. He ends up with 87 speed, so I've got two 87 speed tight ends. One of which has, I believe Dylan Stevens is star development. I'm not 100%. He's got low overall, but mainly it's because of his catching and stuff. But he still makes all the catches, and more importantly, he does not have drop open pass. Brodie Moore is a good third option tight end / fullback. He can do whatever. I didn't do much in free agency here. I did make a trade though late in the season or during the offseason for Tyquan Thornton to essentially replace my speed in Marquise Goodwin, who I lost to age in free agency. So Tyquan Thornton comes in and basically assumes the role that I had with Marquise Goodwin last year. He's faster, he's bigger, and he's better. So even though he's lower overall, I feel like he's better and he's younger, so he'll grow and develop. Deion Kane is a master man, a crazy person. He plays way above that 72 overall, but I had him signed last year. I picked up via free agency, actually outside of free agency whenever we got it post-draft. He was available as a free agent, Dwayne Kramer. He can return kicks for me, but right now he's just kind of depth piece as I figure out what to do with the wide receivers. In free agency, I picked up Ryan Jensen. Basically, the Bucs had to cut him for salary reasons. I picked him up. I had salary to burn. He signed for a 1-year deal. Wyatt Teller, I traded with the Browns. I gave up a second-round pick. Got him for 2 years. So I've fortified my offensive line. Essentially picked up depth with Josh Jones. Re-signed him post-draft. He was a guy I let go into free agency. I signed him back. I drafted Spencer Wall. I picked up Scott Mayon in free agency. I have John Gaines. I have a lot of depth at O-line, which I like. I like to build in the trenches, and these trenches are pretty solid if you ask me. Defensive line, though, was really lacking, so I went into free agency a good bit with these, and I picked up some lower key guys that I felt could do the job in a hybrid defense. Leonard Williams, Justin Matabuk, and then I picked up Mario Kyle in the draft. I believe it's all I did as far as that goes, but that basically solidified my D-line a good bit and my edge. I can play around and move guys inside and outside however I want to. Linebackers I didn't do much with. I had my linebackers pretty much locked in. The only thing I did here was draft Roman Rudolph. And then with the 4th pick in the draft, I picked up Connor Woods, who was normal development, but he was the best corner on the board, I felt like. He rated the highest in Buckman's big board. So I picked him up. He's been a stud when he's been out there, but he's been injured the first couple of weeks. But he goes together with guys like Garrett Williams, who I had last year, Deshaun Elliott, a guy I picked up in free agency to replace Budda Baker, who I traded for a first-round pick, which currently is sitting at 6th overall. It will get higher, though. It is the Bears' first-round pick, and as the Bears do better, obviously my pick falls down. And then I picked up Zane Gonzalez in free agency for a kicker. So I didn't do a ton in free agency, but I basically solidified some pieces that I needed to solidify. And the draft was pretty good for me, even though I was top heavy. I had 2 picks in the first round. I had 1 pick in the second, and that was it till round 4. So, and it was early in round 2 that I had the pick. So I got most of my damage out of the way early and then kind of faded to the bag. But I did pick up guys like Gregory Harper and Dylan Stevens later in the draft that really are contributing right now for my team. So easy answer for Cooley's question is essentially the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, that's because I know that team the best, so that makes it a little easier. Now, this one's an interesting question because this one's a personnel-based question as I bring it back up on screen. Det Fan wants to ask a Lions question. He asked, should the Lions deal St. Brown and get a first or sign him? Well, Det Fan, if you listen to this, or if you're watching now, or if you're listening now, depending on however you're consuming this, there is a third option you can do, and that is let him walk. Because I'll show you real quick as I go to the Lions on the signing sheet here. Amon-Ra St. Brown, if you let him walk in free agency, you get 16 ORP points if somebody signs him in free agency. I can almost guarantee you somebody's going to sign, I believe, a 24-year-old going into age 25 wide receiver on the upswing at 89 overall. That is, granted, he's a little mad and slow at 89 speed. Somebody will pick up Amon-Ra St. Brown. That would get you 16 ORP points on top of the 10 you start with, plus any incentives you earn. So there's 3 options there. Yes, you could probably sign him. I don't know what your cap situation is, but I mean, letting an 89 overall wide receiver walk is always kind of a tenuous battle plan. But you are deep at wide receiver, I do believe. I know you've got I believe you drafted a wide receiver. You also have Jameson Williams sitting there, who is a burner upon burners. And I want to say you have at least one other good wide receiver that's still fairly young. So you're deep at wide receiver. So letting him walk would not be a huge blow, depending on how much he wants. I'm pretty sure at 89 overall, he's probably wanting the moon, which is probably why you're doubting it. Trading him for a first-round pick, yes, that's always an option if somebody will bite on it. The question is, will somebody bite on that? And I don't think they will. I think your best bet, honestly, if you want the max value out of him, is let him walk, let somebody fight for him in free agency. And if somebody signs him, you get 16 ORP points. Now, the drawback is somebody may not sign him, but then he's available in free agency for you to pick up via waiver wire. So you could get him back on a year contract. So letting him walk is not the worst thing in the world, and you could potentially get him back, maybe. But if you don't and he signs, you get 16 ORP points. So those points could help develop other players, especially rookies you just picked up. So there's three options. And I would probably, of the three, I would probably let him walk or sign him. I don't think I'd trade him for a first-round pick unless you see somebody that you have to have, that you think you can get with the pick you get for him. So that would be my suggestion. Now let me blot out that question and move on to the obligatory. Here comes another goofy question or goofy comment. Waffles, when will the Cardinals owner realize they're the team to beat in the NFC West? Whenever it's week 18 and I'm leading the NFC West. Next. Crazy fast. Who will be the last undefeated team and when will they lose, assuming that they don't run the table? Interesting question now. So now that we've gotten the silly question out of the way, and hopefully it's been answered sufficiently, Waffles, there's only one reason for me to get excited about being the leader of the NFC West is whenever the playoffs start and I'm actually in the playoffs because I won the NFC West. Until then, there's no reason to get excited. Again, it's only week 4. But the last undefeated team on the docket. So right now, we've got the Chargers at 4-0. We've got Denver at 3-0, who are playing currently. We got the Jets at 4-0. We've got Minnesota at 4-0. I believe that's it. So we got 4 undefeated teams. I looked at the schedules, and of the 4 schedules, Law will bring up, I think, honestly, the team that will go the longest before getting beat is going to be this team right here. And I'm going to bring it up on screen. Boop. Minnesota. I think Minnesota has the best chance of going undefeated the longest, possibly the whole way. But assuming they don't run the table, as stated in the question, I'm going to pull up their schedule real quick. And by the way, this is no knock against any of the teams on this schedule. I'm just going by kind of how they play and how I've played them, if I know their play styles. I know Rim. Rim can outscore Detfan. Rim can outscore Smash unless Smash holds him to a defensive contest. I feel like he can win, but Minnesota can win both these games. No offense to Too Cold. I think turnovers will bite him in the butt, and I think that's where Minnesota is going to get him. They can score at will. Arizona, I'm not going to put up a fight. Green Bay, divisional matchup in the first of 2. Green Bay is playing well this season, but I think Rim is a better user than Emperor is, and that's no knocking against Emperor. I just feel like that's the truth. I think the first test for Minnesota comes after a Week 10 bye against the Commanders in Waffles. I think that's the first real true, this is a playoff-bound test. And then it follows with Week 12 in Tennessee. If Tennessee keeps rolling like they've been rolling, Week 11 and 12 are going to be tough weeks for him to match up on. He comes out of a bye, so that's good, but 11 and 12 are going to be tough, and if he gets past 11 and 12 with a 0 in the loss column, I think his next big problem is Week 17, because I feel like Meat Boy and Buffalo would have the stones to beat him, especially if the Vikings don't have anything on the line and start resting players in preparation for the playoffs, which is something you probably should do with the injuries. I think 11 and 12 are kind of the close marks, and 17 is the long mark. But I think by week 11, I think Minnesota would potentially go down for the first time. Everybody else I looked at, I felt like would lose before this time frame. So I think the easy answer to this question here, wrong place. Who will be the last undefeated team? I think it'll be the Vikings. and I think it'll be week 11 or week 12 when they potentially will hit their first loss of the season. And then finally, our last question of the many we got tonight. And by the way, I do appreciate all the questions. So, who has the best receiving core in the WFL? Oh boy, I think honestly, based on last season, I'm emphasizing that. I feel like the Titans have one of the best wide receiving core in the league. Now, that being said, I have not looked much at this year's stats, and I have noticed that the Titans have not done well in the receiving category. So what I will do is anything I would do in this particular scenario, I'm going to bring up receiving stats, and I'm going to just see who's up here at the top. And unfortunately, everything's kind of varied up. So now I have to go to depth charts. But I tell you what I'm going to do. Until I'm proven wrong otherwise, I think I'm just going to stick with the Tennessee Titans. You have DeAndre Hopkins, who is still lighting it up at age 32. You have Treylon Burks, who was a revelation last season. Both those guys were top 5 in the league in receiving. Yes, they're not there right now, and Tennessee is 3-1, but we know Cooley can throw the ball around. I'll put it that way. He has set records in the WFL for passing and receiving, so I know he can air it out. So I think based on talent pool plus user, I think right now, I think the Titans have to lead the market. But if you go on pure on-paper talent, I think the Bengals, the person who presented the question, Russa, that's his team currently. I think the Bengals would hold serve with anybody. Tyler Boyd, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, those three right there. I mean, that's an all-star lineup right there potentially. So also Miami with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. So I mean there's lots of, but as far as on paper, Bengals stats based from last year, I go Titans, and that ends it. That does it for this session of Chiefsman's Corner. So before I go, I do want to go over some honorable mentions for players of the podcast. Offensively speaking, I looked at Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson. He went 21 of 28 for 338 yards and 3 touchdowns, but 1 interception in the 35-31 loss to the Steelers, where T.J. Watt lit it up. I wrote down Saquon Barkley for the Giants. He had 26 carries for 156 yards and 1 touchdown in a 27-13 win over the Panthers. And then I also jotted down Chargers halfback Isaiah Spiller, 18 for 123 and a tutty in a 31-10 win over the Bucs. Now, defensively, holy crap, was there so many guys on defense this week that lit it up, I felt like. Vikings safety, Lewis Seen, 2 tackles, 3 interceptions, one of which was a pick 6, and 1 pass deflection in a 41-21 win over the Colts, and that didn't make the cut. 3 interceptions and a pick 6, and that didn't make the cut, folks. That's how tough it was this week. D-line Patriots, Dedrick Wise Jr. had 2 sacks and a 29-10 loss to the Cardinals. Packers defensive end Chris Wormley had 2 sacks and a 34-18 win over the Rams. Giants safety Ryan Neal had 5 tackles and 2 sacks and a 27-13 win over the Panthers. Azeez Ojulari, at outside linebacker for the Giants, also had 2 sacks and 4 tackles in that same win over the Panthers. Titans linebacker Amari Cofield had 2 tackles, 1.5 sacks, and a forced fumble in the 31-24 win over the Raiders. And then again, I mentioned earlier, Raiders cornerback George Womack had only 1 tackle, but 2 pick 6s in a 31-24 loss to the Titans. Those are all honorable mentions on defensive players of the podcast. Any other week, those guys would be defensive players of the podcast for sure. Unfortunately, they just fell on a week when T.J. Watt just went absolutely bug nuts. So just with that being in mind, guys, thank you. Thank you for tuning in, whether you're doing it live or whether you're watching the recording. I appreciate it. The WFL appreciates it, and we hope you're entertained by the show. Let us know by throwing us a like, a subscribe, or leaving any sort of comments. Any feedback, good or bad, is appreciated. And until next Monday, when we go back to recordings, folks, the corner is closed.